My cousins seduced my husband at our wedding reception, got pregnant, and demanded I give them my house in the divorce. But I'm a forensic accountant who discovered she'd been blackmailing married men for years. Now she's facing RICO charges and he lost everything. I should have known something was wrong when Delilah insisted on giving the maid of honor speech without running it by me first. Standing there in her emerald green dress, the same shade as my engagement ring, she grabbed the microphone with a smile that made my stomach twist. Some people believe love conquers all, she began, her eyes locked on my husband Trevor. But sometimes love finds you in the most unexpected places. The room fell silent. Trevor's face went white. That's when I knew. For 6 months, I'd been planning the perfect wedding. Designer dress, destination venue, 3-course dinner for 150 guests. What I hadn't planned for was my cousin seducing my husband during our engagement party, carrying on an affair throughout our entire courtship, and announcing her pregnancy at our reception. Trevor and I have something to share, Delilah continued, placing her hand on her still flat stomach. We're having a baby. The microphone dropped. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. My grandmother clutched her pearls so hard the strand snapped, sending beads rolling across the marble floor. I stood frozen in my $4,000 wedding dress, watching my marriage implode before the cake was even cut. Trevor reached for my hand. Let me explain. I stepped back, my heels clicking against the floor. Explain what? That you've been sleeping with my cousin while planning our wedding? It just happened, he stammered. We never meant to get caught, I finished. The next morning, Trevor moved out. Within a week, Delilah had moved in with him. By month's end, she was demanding half of everything in the divorce, including the house I'd inherited from my parents. The baby needs stability, she told my lawyer, rubbing her belly dramatically. And Trevor deserves to live somewhere that isn't tainted by his past mistakes. That's when she made her fatal error. She underestimated exactly what I do for a living. As a forensic accountant, I specialize in following money trails that people think they've hidden. Corporate fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, I've seen it all. But I'd never turned those skills on family before. Late one night, unable to sleep in my empty house, I did what I do best. I started digging. Delilah's financial records told an interesting story. For someone who claimed to work part-time at a boutique, she had an awful lot of unexplained deposits, regular payments from various LLCs, cash transfers that didn't match any legitimate income source. The deeper I dug, the clearer the pattern became. The pattern was sophisticated, more sophisticated than anything I'd seen in my 15 years as a forensic accountant. Every month, Delilah received payments from different shell companies, amounts ranging from $2,000 to $15,000. The payments came like clockwork, always just under the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting requirements. Someone had taught her how to structure these transactions. Someone who understood financial regulations intimately. I cross-referenced the company names with public records, diving deep into incorporation documents, registered agent information, and business license application. Each LLC was registered to a different address, but they all shared one terrifying commonality. Their registered agents were prominent married men in our city. Dr. Harrison Pierce, the orthopedic surgeon whose wife sat on the hospital board and whose daughter was in my graduating class. Judge William Crawford, who'd presided over high-profile custody cases, and whose son played tennis at the same club where Delilah worked part-time. City Councilman Robert Lang, who'd campaigned on family values and whose wife organized the charity galas where Delilah volunteered. Assistant District Attorney Marcus Chen, who'd prosecuted white-collar criminals and whose wife ran in the same social circles as my family. Real estate mogul David Thornton, whose wife had been my mother's college roommate. All of them paying my cousin monthly fees through meticulously constructed shell companies. All of them with wives who trusted them completely. All of them with careers and reputations that couldn't survive scandal. I spent 3 weeks building a comprehensive database, working 18-hour days fueled by rage and espresso, bank records, social media posts, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, credit card statements, travel itineraries. The trail painted a disturbing picture of a woman who'd been systematically targeting married men for years, turning seduction into a calculated business model. Her method was always the same, refined through repetition like a surgeon perfecting a procedure. She'd research her targets thoroughly, their schedules, their weaknesses, their wife's travel patterns. She'd position herself strategically at upscale establishments where these men felt safe and powerful. Country clubs during golf tournaments, charity galas during cocktail hours, business conferences during networking events, hotel bars during out-of-town meetings. The seduction phase lasted exactly 6 weeks, long enough to create genuine emotional attachment, short enough to avoid complicated entanglements. She'd play the role perfectly, the vulnerable woman who understood their pressures, who appreciated their success, who made them feel young and desirable again. Then came the documentation phase. Hidden cameras in hotel rooms, audio recordings of intimate conversations, screenshots of explicit text messages, photos of them together in compromising positions. All of it carefully preserved and organized with military precision. Finally, the monetization. A tearful confession about pregnancy scares or financial troubles, subtle mentions of her discretion and loyalty. Then, when they tried to end things, the gentle reminder of how much they both had to lose if their wives found out. The payments would start small, $2,000 here, $3,000 there, just enough to make them comfortable with the arrangement. But the amounts grew steadily as she introduced new expenses. Medical bills, rent increases, family emergencies, car repairs, each demand accompanied by increasingly explicit evidence of their affair. What made it particularly insidious was how she studied each victim's psychology. Dr. Pierce was a perfectionist who couldn't bear the thought of his wife discovering his gambling addiction alongside his infidelity. Judge Crawford was terrified of losing his judicial position after a previous ethical violation had nearly cost him his career. Councilman Lang was hiding his son's drug arrest and knew any scandal would destroy his political ambitions. She'd even maintained detailed dossiers on their wives and children. Margaret Pierce's schedule at the hospital auxiliary, Judge Crawford's wife's book club meetings, Councilman Lang's wife's tennis tournaments. She knew exactly when each man would be vulnerable and available. The most chilling discovery came when I accessed her cloud storage through a password I remembered from our childhood, our grandmother's maiden name, plus her birth date, the same combination she'd used for everything since we were teenagers. Inside were hundreds of gigabytes of files organized with corporate-level efficiency, folders labeled by victim names with psychological profiles that read like FBI case files, subfolders organized by date and activity type, photo galleries with timestamps and GPS coordinates, audio files transcribed and indexed by keyword, video recordings edited and compressed for maximum impact. Each file was meticulously labeled with metadata that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. Dates, locations, dollar amounts, vulnerability assessments, escalation timelines. She'd even created spreadsheets tracking payment schedules, victim compliance rates, and risk factors for exposure. But the most disturbing folder was labeled Future Projects. Inside were detailed research files on potential targets, including their financial situations, marriage stability assessments, and preliminary psychological evaluations. She'd been planning to expand her operation significantly. One file made my blood freeze. It was labeled Extended Family Assets and contained comprehensive research on my inheritance, Trevor's earning potential, and detailed notes about our wedding planning expenses. She'd been targeting us from the moment I announced my engagement. Trevor wasn't just her latest mark, he was her biggest score. Instead of hidden vulnerabilities, she'd created the situation herself. She'd seduced him during our engagement, documented everything, and then taken the ultimate gamble, pregnancy and marriage destruction for maximum payout. My inheritance wasn't just collateral damage, it was the primary objective. I discovered she'd been studying my financial records for months, probably accessing them through Trevor's computer when she stayed at his apartment during their affair. She knew exactly how much the house was worth, how much I had in retirement accounts, even the value of my mother's jewelry collection. But she'd made a crucial mistake that only someone with my background would catch. She documented everything so thoroughly that her own crimes were laid bare in digital detail. Every transaction, every threat, every moment of psychological manipulation was preserved in her own files. I printed every piece of evidence, spending $800 on ink cartridges and paper, organizing it chronologically into 17 3-ring binders. Then I called my lawyer, not my divorce attorney, but Mitchell Stone, my criminal law contact from my days investigating corporate fraud for the state attorney general's office. This isn't just adultery or extortion, I explained to Mitchell as he reviewed the files in his downtown office, his face growing paler with each page. This is organized crime. She's been running a systematic blackmail operation for at least 6 years, maybe longer. Look at these payment schedules. Look at these victim profiles. Look at this business plan for expansion. Mitchell leaned back in his leather chair, loosening his tie as he studied a particularly damning spreadsheet that tracked victim compliance and payment reliability, like a corporate earnings report. These payment amounts suggest she's collected over $1.2 million from her victims. At this scale, with this level of organization and documentation, we're looking at federal racketeering charges. RICO? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Absolutely. The pattern of using multiple shell companies to collect extortion payments constitutes an ongoing criminal enterprise. The interstate commerce element is satisfied by the electronic transfers and the fact that several victims traveled across state lines for business meetings where she made contact. This could be the biggest organized extortion case this district has seen in years. Mitchell spent the next hour making phone calls while I sat in his waiting room, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the city skyline. When he emerged, his expression was grim but determined. I've arranged an emergency meeting with the FBI's white-collar crime unit for tomorrow morning. Special Agent Rodriguez is the lead investigator for organized financial crimes in this region. She's very interested in what you've found. Apparently, they've been investigating some unusual financial activity connected to several prominent men in our city, but they didn't have enough evidence to establish a pattern. Now they do, I said. That evening, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by evidence of my cousin's crimes, and made the most difficult phone call of my life. My mother was in Florida, blissfully unaware of the drama that had unfolded since my wedding. "How's married life, sweetheart?" she asked cheerfully when she picked up the phone. I took a deep breath. "Mom, I need to tell you something about Delilah, and about Trevor, and about what really happened at my wedding." The conversation lasted 3 hours. My mother cycled through disbelief, horror, rage, and finally, cold determination. By the end, she was ready to drive back to town and confront her sister about her daughter's crimes. "Don't," I said firmly. "Let the FBI handle it. This is bigger than family drama now. This is federal crime, and if Aunt Patricia warns Delilah that we know, she might destroy evidence or flee." "How could I have missed this?" my mother whispered. "How could Patricia not have known what her daughter was doing?" "Because Delilah is a sociopath," I said bluntly. "She's been perfecting this act her entire life. Look at how she fooled me. Look at how she fooled Trevor. Look at how she fooled 18 different men and their families." The next morning, I met with Special Agent Rodriguez and her team at the federal building downtown. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded me of myself during difficult corporate audits. "Ms. Hartwell." Agent Rodriguez said as I walked through Delilah's operation, using charts and spreadsheets that would make any prosecutor smile. We've been tracking some of these shell companies for months as part of a broader investigation into organized financial crimes. Your cousin's name has come up peripherally, but we didn't have enough evidence to establish a clear pattern of criminal behavior. Now you do, I replied, sliding a flash drive across the conference table. Everything's on there. Financial records, communications, photographic evidence, psychological profiles, business plans. She documented her own crimes in obsessive detail. Agent Rodriguez inserted the drive into her laptop, and her eyebrows climbed higher with each folder she opened. This is extraordinary. How did you access her personal files? She used the same password for everything since we were kids, and she trusted cloud storage more than she should have. The level of documentation is actually her greatest vulnerability. She treated this like a legitimate business operation. The evidence suggests she's been operating for at least 6 years, possibly longer. Have you identified any other potential victims beyond the 18 documented cases? I opened my notebook to pages covered with names, dates, and financial transactions. Based on the payment patterns and her travel records, I think there might be at least 12 more men she's targeted. I've compiled a list of possibilities based on unexplained financial transactions, her documented interactions at social events, and gaps in her payment schedule that suggest other income sources. Agent Rodriguez called in 2 more agents and a federal prosecutor. We spent 6 hours going through every detail of Delilah's operation, identifying federal crimes, mapping the network of shell companies, and planning the most comprehensive investigation the unit had undertaken in years. We'll need to move quickly, the prosecutor explained. If she suspects you've discovered her activities, she might destroy evidence or flee. Given the sophistication of this operation and the number of victims involved, we're looking at executing simultaneous search warrants on multiple locations across 3 states. 3 states? I asked. She's been operating in Georgia and South Carolina as well, Agent Rodriguez explained. We found evidence of similar shell companies and victim patterns in Atlanta and Charleston. This is bigger than just your city. The raid happened on a Tuesday morning at 6 a.m., coordinated across multiple jurisdictions. I watched from my office window as federal agents executed search warrants at Delilah's apartment, Trevor's house, 3 shell company addresses, 2 storage units, and the boutique where she supposedly worked part-time. Black SUVs surrounded each location. Agents and FBI windbreakers carried out boxes of evidence, computer equipment, and financial records. The local news stations arrived within an hour, broadcasting live footage of the coordinated operation. My phone started ringing at 6:15. Trevor called first, hysterical and barely coherent. They took everything, he sobbed. My computers, my phone, my financial records, my medical files, even my prescription bottles. They're saying Delilah was running some kind of criminal enterprise and that I might be considered an accomplice. They think I knew about the other men. They think I helped her target victims through my medical practice. An accomplice to what? I asked, though I already knew the answer. They're claiming she was blackmailing people, that our whole relationship was part of some scheme to extort money from me through the divorce. They think I was helping her identify wealthy patients and their families. They want to know if I provided her with confidential patient information or introduced her to colleagues at hospital functions. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Did you? Of course not. I thought she loved me. I thought we were building a life together. I thought the baby was mine. I thought everything was real. The irony was perfect and devastating. Trevor, who'd betrayed me for what he thought was love, had been nothing more than another mark in Delilah's elaborate con game. Worse, he'd been the mark she'd used to destroy my life and steal my inheritance. Trevor, I said carefully, did you ever introduce her to any of your colleagues? Any married doctors or hospital administrators? A long silence. Trevor? She came to several hospital fundraisers with me. She was very social. People loved her. She had this way of making everyone feel special, like they were the most interesting person in the room. My blood ran cold. Which people specifically? Dr. Pierce was quite taken with her. Judge Crawford, when he was having his surgery, she visited him several times, said she wanted to make sure he was comfortable. A few department heads, the hospital board members at the Christmas party, but she was just being friendly. She's good with people. She'd used Trevor's connections and his professional reputation to identify and access new victims. His medical practice had been her hunting ground, his colleagues her prey. She turned his trust into a weapon against innocent people. The second call came from my Aunt Patricia, Delilah's mother, screaming accusations about family loyalty and betrayal. She was convinced I'd fabricated evidence to frame her daughter out of jealousy over Trevor. The third call was from Delilah herself, somehow managing to call from federal custody during a brief window when her lawyer was present. How could you do this to family? She hissed into the phone. I'm pregnant. I'm carrying your cousin's child. You're destroying an innocent baby's future. No, I said calmly. You're carrying Judge Crawford's child. The DNA tests will prove that soon enough. Silence stretched between us for nearly a minute. You forgot to delete the medical records from your cloud storage, I continued, including the paternity test results you got 3 weeks ago. You've known all along it wasn't Trevor's baby. You planned this entire pregnancy as leverage for the divorce settlement. You don't understand what you've done, she whispered, her voice taking on a desperate edge I'd never heard before. These men will lose everything. Their families will be destroyed. Children will grow up without fathers. Wives will lose their homes. You've ruined innocent people's lives. Those same children will grow up without fathers who are criminals, I replied. Those wives deserve to know the truth about their marriages. You made those choices for them when you decided to become a professional blackmailer. You destroyed those families the moment you targeted their fathers. I gave them what they wanted, she said, her voice growing stronger, more defiant. I made them feel desired. I listened to their problems. I provided a service. You provided extortion, I corrected. You turned intimacy into a weapon and love into a business transaction. You're a predator who targeted vulnerable people and exploited their weaknesses for profit. The line went dead. Over the next weeks, the investigation expanded exponentially as more victims came forward and additional evidence was uncovered. The final count was staggering: 28 men over 7 years across 3 states, with total extortion payments exceeding $2.1 million. The scheme had been even more sophisticated than I'd initially discovered. Delilah had employed a network of accomplices across multiple cities: a photographer who specialized in hidden surveillance equipment, a computer expert who helped establish the shell companies and maintain the digital infrastructure, a lawyer who helped structure the payments to avoid detection, and provided legal advice on avoiding prosecution. Most disturbing of all, she'd recruited 2 other women to help expand the operation. They'd been running parallel schemes in Atlanta and Charleston, using Delilah's methods and sharing victim information across state lines. The federal investigation revealed that Delilah's operation had generated enough revenue to qualify as a mid-sized business. She'd even paid taxes on some of her extortion income, claiming it as consulting fees to make her lifestyle appear legitimate. The indictments came down 8 weeks after the initial raids, handed up by a federal grand jury that had heard testimony from victim after victim. Delilah was charged with 47 counts including extortion, wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit multiple federal crimes. The government was seeking forfeiture of all assets acquired through her criminal enterprise: the expensive jewelry Trevor had bought her with money from his retirement account, the luxury car she'd purchased with extortion payments, the downtown condo she'd used for her operations, and even the designer clothes she'd worn to seduce her victims. Her accomplices were charged separately in a massive conspiracy case. The photographer got 8 years in federal prison. The computer expert got 5 years and a $400,000 fine. The lawyer was disbarred and sentenced to 12 years. The 2 women operating parallel schemes got 7 years each. Trevor wasn't charged criminally, but the civil implications destroyed his life completely. 8 of Delilah's victims filed lawsuits claiming he'd been a willing participant in the scheme, providing patient information and access to hospital fundraisers, where she identified targets. His medical malpractice insurance refused to cover the claims, citing the criminal nature of the alleged conduct. The hospital administration launched their own investigation into his professional conduct and patient confidentiality practices. His medical practice collapsed when the hospital board, led by Dr. Pierce's wife, who'd learned about her husband's affair and gambling debts through the federal investigation, revoked his privileges and banned him from all hospital facilities. The state medical board opened their own investigation into his professional conduct, ultimately suspending his license pending a complete review of his patient records and professional activities. The divorce proceeded rapidly once criminal charges were filed. Trevor's lawyer advised him to agree to everything I requested rather than risk further scrutiny of his finances and activities during depositions. I kept the house, my inheritance, my retirement accounts, and all the wedding gifts. He kept his legal bills, his shame, and a reputation that would follow him for the rest of his career. The pregnancy, it turned out, was real, but DNA tests confirmed the baby belonged to Judge Crawford, who was forced to resign from the bench when the scandal broke. His wife of 22 years filed for divorce and took half of everything in their settlement, including the family home and his judicial pension. Their 3 children, now teenagers, refused to speak to him and changed their last names to their mother's maiden name to distance themselves from the scandal. Crawford lost his law license and was forced to take a job as a paralegal in another state. Dr. Pierce's marriage survived, but barely. His wife insisted on complete financial transparency, joint therapy sessions, and his enrollment in Gamblers Anonymous. He was forced to sell his private practice and take a salaried position at a community health center to pay off his gambling debts and legal fees. The family lost their country club membership, their social standing, and most of their friends. Their daughter transferred schools to escape the whispers and stares from classmates who'd seen the news coverage. Councilman Lang withdrew from his re-election campaign and moved his family to another state where they could start over. His wife stayed in their hometown with their children, who were struggling with depression and anxiety from the public humiliation. The ripple effects continued for months. Careers destroyed, marriages ended, children traumatized, bank accounts emptied by legal fees and civil judgments, social circles fractured by scandal and suspicion. Several victims required psychological counseling to deal with the trauma of discovering their intimate relationships had been elaborate cons designed to steal their money and destroy their lives. The local news media covered every development in excruciating detail. Photos of the accused, interviews with neighbors and colleagues, timeline graphics showing the progression of the scheme, financial breakdowns of the money stolen and the lives destroyed. Delilah's trial lasted 5 weeks and became a media sensation. The evidence was overwhelming. Her own meticulous documentation became the prosecution's strongest weapon. Recordings of her coaching other women on seduction techniques, spreadsheets showing payment schedules and victim compliance rates, video evidence of her planning sessions with accomplices. The prosecution called 43 witnesses, including 22 victims who testified about the psychological manipulation and financial devastation they'd suffered. The defense could offer no credible explanation for the mountain of evidence Delilah had created against herself. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 47 counts. The sentencing hearing was packed with victims and their families, local media, and federal law enforcement officials who'd worked the case. The judge allowed anyone affected by Delilah's crimes to speak before sentencing. Judge Crawford's ex-wife spoke about the devastation of learning about her husband's double life through federal agents knocking on her door at dawn. Dr. Pierce's teenage daughter read a letter about losing trust in authority figures and struggling with anxiety since the scandal broke. Councilman Lang's son described the bullying he endured at school when the scandal made national news. Several wives talked about the humiliation of learning their husband's affairs had been business transactions designed to steal their family's financial security. When my turn came, I stood at the podium and looked directly at my cousin, who'd lost 40 pounds during the trial, and looked 20 years older than her actual age. "You didn't just steal money," I said, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. "You stole trust, you stole marriages, you stole children's faith in their fathers, you turned intimacy into a weapon and love into a business transaction." I paused, letting the words sink in. "The worst part is that your family. You sat at our dinner table for holidays. You played with our children at family reunions. You celebrated our successes and comforted our failures. You were at my wedding knowing you'd already started destroying it. And all the while, you were planning how to exploit us for profit. You made every future relationship harder for your victims because you taught them that love can be fake and trust can be purchased. You didn't just steal their money, you stole their ability to believe in genuine human connection." The judge sentenced Delilah to 18 years in federal prison and ordered her to pay $3.2 million in restitution to her victims, money she didn't have since most of her assets were forfeited to the government. The sentence was the longest ever handed down in the district for organized extortion, reflecting both the scope of her crimes and the devastating impact on her victims. Trevor lost everything, not just to divorce proceedings, but to legal fees and civil judgments. His retirement account was drained. His medical practice was sold to pay settlements with patients who sued for privacy violations. He moved back in with his parents and took a job at an urgent care clinic in a small town where patients wouldn't recognize his name from news coverage. His medical license was permanently revoked after the state board found evidence that he'd violated patient confidentiality by discussing their personal information with Delilah, even if he didn't realize she was using it for criminal purposes. I kept my inheritance, my career, and my dignity. But more importantly, I'd discovered something about myself that I never knew existed. When cornered, when betrayed by people I'd trusted completely, I didn't collapse or retreat. I fought back with every tool at my disposal. The investigation and trial had been the most challenging period of my life, but it had also been the most clarifying. I learned that family loyalty has limits, that some betrayals are so complete they sever all bonds permanently, that justice sometimes requires destroying the people who've destroyed others. 6 months after the sentencing, I received an unexpected visitor. Dr. E. Pierce's wife, Margaret, stood on my doorstep holding a bottle of champagne and wearing a smile I hadn't seen since before the scandal broke. "I wanted to thank you," she said as we sat on my porch, watching the sunset paint the sky purple and gold. "If you hadn't exposed her, Harrison would still be trapped in her web. Our marriage almost didn't survive. The gambling, the lies, the affair, the public humiliation. But we're in counseling now. He's attending Gamblers Anonymous. For the first time in years, he's being completely honest about everything." We sat in comfortable silence, sipping champagne and watching fireflies begin their evening dance. "The hardest part," Margaret continued, "was realizing how many signs I'd missed. The unexplained expenses, the secretive phone calls, the changes in his behavior. I kept making excuses because I couldn't imagine he was capable of deception on that scale. None of us could," I said. "That's what made her so dangerous. She understood exactly how to exploit the trust between family members and spouses." "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked eventually. "Exposing her, I mean. She is family, and so many people got hurt in the process." I thought about the question for a long moment. About family loyalty versus justice. About the wives who deserved to know the truth about their marriages. About the children who would grow up in honest homes instead of houses built on lies and extortion. About the future victims who would never fall into Delilah's web because she was behind bars. "No," I said finally. "Some betrayals are so complete that blood doesn't matter anymore. She chose to make me her enemy the moment she decided my husband was just another paycheck. She chose to destroy my marriage for money. She chose to steal my inheritance through fraud. She stopped being family when she started seeing me as a target." "But what about all the collateral damage?" Margaret pressed. "The children who lost their fathers' reputations? The wives who had to rebuild their lives? Those families deserve the truth," I said firmly. "Yes, it was painful. Yes, it was devastating. But they were living lies built on criminal exploitation. Their marriages were already destroyed. They just didn't know it yet. I gave them the chance to rebuild on honest foundations." Margaret nodded and refilled our glasses. "What will you do now?" she asked. I smiled, thinking about the job offer I'd received from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, about using my skills to help other victims of fraud and extortion, about turning my worst experience into something that could protect innocent people from predators like Delilah. "I'm going to do what I do best," I said. "Follow the money and make sure the truth comes out. The FBI wants me to head up a new task force investigating organized financial crimes targeting families and marriages. Apparently, there are a lot more people like Delilah out there, and they're getting more sophisticated every year." As Margaret left, I sat alone on my porch, looking at the house I'd almost lost, and feeling grateful for every painful detail that led me here. Sometimes the worst betrayals reveal who people really are, and show you exactly how strong you've become. The next morning, I started my new job hunting white-collar criminals for the federal government. My first case involved a romance scammer who'd bilked elderly widows out of their life savings through fake online relationships. My second was a cryptocurrency Ponzi scheme that had stolen millions from retirement accounts. My third was a marriage fraud ring that helped foreign nationals obtain citizenship through fake marriages to unsuspecting Americans. Each case reminded me why I'd made the right choice. Each convicted criminal was someone who couldn't hurt another innocent victim. Each investigation was a chance to protect people who didn't have the skills or resources to protect themselves. Delilah had taught me an important lesson that would guide the rest of my career. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's becoming someone who protects others from people like her. 2 years later, I received a letter from prison. Delilah's handwriting was shaky, her words carefully chosen and obviously reviewed by her counselor before sending. "I hope you can forgive me someday," she wrote. "I know what I did was wrong. I know I hurt people who didn't deserve it, including you. I've had a lot of time to think about the choices I made and the lives I destroyed. I'm getting counseling now. I'm trying to understand how I became someone capable of such calculated cruelty. The therapist says I have antisocial personality disorder and that my behavior was driven by a need for control and financial security that stemmed from childhood trauma. I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just trying to understand how I got so lost. I know you'll probably never respond to this letter, and I understand why, but I wanted you to know that I think about what I did every day. I think about Trevor and how I manipulated him. I think about your wedding and how I destroyed what should have been the happiest day of your life. I think about all the families I hurt and all the trust I broke. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that what you did, exposing me, was the right thing. I needed to be stopped before I hurt more people." I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Some apologies come too late. Some bridges once burned can never be rebuilt. Some people forfeit the right to forgiveness when their betrayals cross certain lines. But some people, once betrayed, discover they're stronger than they ever imagined. They learn that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about protection. They find that the worst experiences can become the foundation for the most meaningful work. And sometimes, that discovery is worth everything you lose along the way. 5 years after Delilah's sentencing, I'd helped convict 37 criminals who'd stolen over $50 million from innocent victims. I'd protected hundreds of families from financial predators and helped recover millions in stolen assets. Trevor never remarried. The last I heard, he was working at a rural clinic, living quietly and alone. Some mistakes, it seems, follow you forever. Delilah will be eligible for parole in 12 years. I'll be there at every hearing, carrying the voices of her victims, making sure justice isn't forgotten. Because some stories don't end with forgiveness or redemption. Sometimes they end with accountability, protection, and the knowledge that evil was stopped before it could spread further. And sometimes, that's enough.